Welcome to the Ego's Game, How to See Through the Illusion of Me. Written and published by Mindful Literary, this book invites you on a journey beyond the noise of the ego, beyond the endless striving, and into the peace and freedom that comes from discovering your true self. As you listen, you'll uncover the patterns of the ego, the stories it tells, and the traps it sets. But more importantly, you'll learn how to step outside of its games and into a life of presence, connection, and authenticity. This book is more than words. It's an exploration, a reflection, and an invitation to see through the illusions that have held you back. If this journey resonates with you, we encourage you to support our work. Every purchase helps us continue creating transformative content like this. Take a deep breath, let go of any distractions, and prepare to explore the space beyond me. Let's begin. Introduction: The Illusion of Me. Who am I? It's a question as old as humanity, whispered in the quiet moments of reflection, asked in the face of change or loss, and pondered when life's events shake the foundation of who we believe we are. The answer we often give, our name, our job, our achievements, our roles, is a story we've told ourselves, a collection of labels and narratives carefully woven together. But what if this story isn't the full truth? What if the me you think you are, the one who craves approval, avoids discomfort, and clings to certainty, isn't the real you at all? What if it's an illusion, crafted not by your essence, but by something far more fragile and temporary? This is the ego's game, to convince you that the story is reality, that the mask is your face, and that the game is life itself. The ego is an unseen puppeteer, pulling the strings of your thoughts, shaping your actions, and influencing your identity. It's not who you truly are, but it wants you to believe it is. It's the voice in your head that whispers, "I need to win to be worthy. If they don't like me, I've failed. I am what I achieve, what I own, what I prove." The ego thrives on separation. It sees the world as a competition, with you at the center. It says, "This is mine. That is not me. I am different, better, worse, or apart." And in doing so, it creates an illusion, a fragile, defensive self that clings to its identity as if its life depends on it. The ego tells you that you are separate from others, separate from nature, separate from the flow of life. But this separateness is a lie. When you strip away the stories, who are you? When you let go of your roles, what remains? When you stop defending, striving, and proving, what is left? The ego wants you to believe you are small, isolated, and incomplete. But the truth is far more expansive. You are not the fragile, separate self the ego claims you to be. You are the awareness behind the thoughts, the stillness beneath the noise, the presence that exists whether or not the stories are there. The ego's game is exhausting. It demands constant validation. It creates endless comparisons. It fears loss, change, and vulnerability. And because the ego is never satisfied, it traps us in cycles of striving and anxiety. You achieve something, and it says, "What's next?" You gain love or approval, and it says, "Don't lose it." You face failure or rejection, and it says, "You're not enough." The ego creates suffering because it is built on fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being forgotten, fear of being nothing. But what if this fear wasn't real? What if the ego's stories were just that, stories? When you see the ego for what it is, a construct, not a truth, you begin to glimpse the freedom beyond it. A freedom where you no longer need to prove yourself. A freedom where love isn't something you earn, but something you are. A freedom where life is no longer a battle, but a flow. This isn't about destroying the ego. It's about understanding it. When you see the game, you stop playing by its rules. And when you stop playing, you discover something profound. The peace of presence, the joy of connection, the lightness of being unburdened by the illusion of me. This book is an invitation to step off the board and out of the ego's game. In part 1, we'll explore the ego, what it is, how it forms, and the rules it plays by. In part 2, we'll learn to see through the illusion, disrupting the ego's patterns and stepping into awareness. In part 3, we'll escape the ego's traps, letting go of identity, control, and fear. In part 4, we'll discover how to live beyond the ego, bringing this clarity into our relationships, work, and daily life. The journey won't always be comfortable. The ego resists being seen. It clings tightly to its stories. But with each step, the weight of the illusion will lighten. And as it does, you'll find yourself stepping into a life that feels freer, fuller, and more authentically you. This isn't a book of answers. It's a book of questions. It's not here to tell you who you are. It's here to help you remember. So, as you read, I invite you to pause, reflect, and ask yourself, what is the story I'm telling about me? What would it feel like to let that story go? Who am I really? The ego's game is an illusion, but the freedom beyond it is real. Let's begin. Chapter 1. What is the ego? The ego is not a villain. It's not something to destroy or eliminate. It's simply a lens, a construct of the mind designed to make sense of the world. But when we forget that it's just a lens, we mistake it for who we are. And that's where the trouble begins. The origins of the ego. The ego begins to form in childhood, like a seed planted in the fertile soil of experience. As infants, we exist in a state of pure being. There is no separation between self and other, no distinction between me and not me. The world is a seamless flow of sensations, colors, and sounds. But as we grow, something shifts. We begin to notice patterns, faces, voices, and reactions to our cries and laughter. We learn that some actions bring smiles and warmth, while others bring disapproval or coldness. We start to form an identity, piecing together who we think we are based on how the world responds to us. This identity, the ego, isn't inherently bad. In fact, it's essential. The ego helps us navigate life. It gives us a sense of self, allowing us to say, I am here. It helps us differentiate between me and not me, creating boundaries that protect us. It allows us to function in the world, to have preferences, goals, and a sense of purpose. But while the ego is a helpful tool, it becomes problematic when we mistake it for the entirety of who we are. The ego thrives on labels and definitions. I am smart. I am successful. I am an artist, a parent, a leader, a friend. But just as important as what the ego says we are is what it says we are not. I am not weak. I am not a failure. I am not like them. These labels and distinctions create a sense of identity, a feeling of separateness from others and from the world. The ego thrives on this separation because it defines itself through contrast. I am good because they are bad. I am successful because they are struggling. I am unique because I am not like everyone else. But this constant need for comparison and distinction creates a fragile foundation. What happens when someone questions your intelligence, beauty, or success? What happens when the roles you've tied your identity to, partner, parent, professional, are no longer there? When the ego's labels are threatened, it panics. And this is where suffering begins. The ego isn't just a collection of labels, it's a filter. Every experience, every interaction, every thought passes through the ego's lens. If someone praises you, the ego says, this means I'm worthy. If someone criticizes you, the ego says, this means I'm a failure. If someone ignores you, the ego says, this means I don't matter. The ego doesn't see reality as it is. It sees reality as a reflection of itself. If you believe you're unworthy, the ego will interpret neutral situations as proof of that belief. If you believe you're superior, the ego will dismiss or belittle anything that challenges that view. The ego's filter is constant, but it's also invisible. We don't realize we're looking through it, so we mistake its distorted version of reality for the truth. At its core, the ego is trying to protect you. It wants you to feel safe, so it clings to what's familiar. It wants you to feel valued, so it seeks praise and avoids criticism. It wants you to feel important, so it builds stories about your identity and defends them fiercely. But the ego's protection comes at a cost. It keeps you in a constant state of comparison and competition. It makes you afraid of failure, rejection, and change. It creates a false sense of separation, cutting you off from others, from the world, and from your true self. The ego isn't inherently bad, it's simply limited. It sees the world through a narrow lens, focusing on survival and identity while missing the bigger picture. The problem with the ego isn't that it exists, it's that we believe it's who we are. We mistake the mask for the face. We mistake the story for the storyteller. We mistake the game for life itself. But you are not your ego. You are not your labels or your roles. You are not your thoughts or your emotions. You are not the stories you tell yourself about who you are. You are the awareness behind all of it, the still, quiet presence that watches the ego's game unfold. The ego is a construct, a tool your mind created to navigate the world. But tools are meant to be used, not to control you. When you start to see the ego for what it is, a profound shift happens. You stop taking its stories so seriously. You stop reacting to its fears and defenses. You start to glimpse a version of yourself that isn't bound by identity, comparison, or fear. This is the beginning of freedom. Ask yourself, What labels have I tied to my identity? How do I react when those labels are threatened? What would it feel like to let go of the need to define myself? The ego isn't your enemy, it's a part of you. But it's not all of you. And as you begin to see it for what it is, you'll find yourself stepping into something deeper, truer, and infinitely freer. The ego is the lens through which we've been taught to see the world. But when we look beyond it, we discover a vision of life that's richer, fuller, and more real than we ever imagined. This is the beginning of seeing through the illusion of me. Let's keep going. Chapter 2: The Ego's Rules. The ego plays by a set of unspoken rules, rules that shape how we think, act, and perceive the world. These rules aren't written anywhere, yet they govern our lives with relentless precision. The trouble is, the game the ego plays is unwinnable, and the rules only create more striving, comparison, and fear. Rule 1: More is better. The ego operates on a simple principle. What you have is never enough. If you have money, you need more. If you have success, you need greater recognition. If you have love, you need constant reassurance. The ego is never satisfied because its sense of self-worth is tied to external validation. It believes that accumulating more, whether it's possessions, achievements, or approval, will finally make it feel whole. But no matter how much you acquire, the ego always moves the goalpost. Imagine climbing a mountain, convinced that the summit will bring you happiness. But when you reach the top, you see another peak in the distance, taller and more alluring. The ego convinces you that happiness is always just over the horizon. You tell yourself, I'll be happy when I get the promotion. But then you want the next one. You think, I'll feel worthy when I reach this milestone. But then you see someone else who's achieved more. The pursuit of more is endless because the ego's hunger is insatiable. The truth is, the ego doesn't want you to feel satisfied. It thrives on dissatisfaction. Freedom from this rule begins with recognizing that enough isn't out there. It's in here. Satisfaction isn't found in accumulating more. It's found in appreciating what's already present. The question isn't, what else can I get? It's, can I see the abundance I already have? When you step off the treadmill of more, you discover something the ego can't offer: contentment. Rule 2: Comparison is key. The ego measures itself by comparison. It asks, am I better or worse? It thrives on being special, whether that means superior or uniquely flawed. This rule keeps you locked in a constant state of evaluation. Your appearance compared to others. Your achievements stacked against someone else's. Your worth measured by external benchmarks. The ego doesn't care whether the comparison makes you feel better or worse. It just needs you to compare. Comparison creates a trap. If you feel superior, the ego inflates, but it becomes afraid of losing its status. If you feel inferior, the ego deflates, fueling feelings of inadequacy. In both cases, comparison disconnects you from yourself and others. You stop appreciating your own unique path because you're too busy measuring it against someone else's. You lose the ability to connect authentically because the ego sees others as competition, not companions. To escape the comparison trap, you must shift your focus from better or worse to what is. Instead of asking, am I enough compared to them? Ask, what am I grateful for in my life right now? Instead of seeing others as competition, see them as reflections. Each person offering a unique perspective on what it means to be human. When you stop comparing, you free yourself to live fully and authentically. Rule 3: Defend at all costs. The ego's primary instinct is survival. It will defend its identity, its beliefs, and its image at any cost. It clings to what it knows, even if it's causing suffering, because the unknown feels like a threat. This rule makes the ego rigid and resistant to change. It says, this is who I am, and I must protect it. It fears vulnerability because vulnerability feels like weakness. Change threatens the ego's sense of self. If you're no longer the overachiever, who are you? If you admit you were wrong, does that make you unworthy? If you let go of the role you've always played, what's left? The ego resists these questions because they force it to confront its impermanence. But this resistance creates suffering. You hold on to relationships that no longer serve you. You cling to beliefs that limit your growth. You avoid opportunities that require stepping into the unknown. To break free from the ego's need to defend, you must embrace curiosity and openness. Instead of clinging to I am this, ask, who am I beyond this role or belief? Instead of fearing vulnerability, see it as strength, the courage to be real, to connect, and to grow. Change isn't the enemy of the ego, it's the doorway to freedom. Seeing the ego's game. Ask yourself, where in my life am I chasing more? How often do I compare myself to others? And what does it cost me? What am I defending, and why? Seeing the ego's rules doesn't mean you have to destroy the ego. It means you stop letting it control the game. When you recognize the rules, you can choose to step outside them. And in that choice, you begin to discover a life that's freer, lighter, and more authentic than the ego could ever imagine. The ego plays by its rules, but you don't have to. By seeing through the illusions of more, comparison, and defense, you can start to reclaim your life, not as a competition or a struggle, but as a profound and beautiful journey. Let's continue. Chapter 3. The Masks We Wear. The ego is a master of disguise. It creates masks, personas we wear to protect ourselves from rejection, failure, and vulnerability. But these masks, while comforting, also hide our true selves. To truly live authentically, we must first recognize the masks and learn to see beyond them. How the ego creates personas. The ego's primary goal is self-preservation. To achieve this, it creates masks, identities we wear to navigate the world and protect ourselves from perceived threats. A child who learns that love comes from achievement might wear the mask of the achiever. Someone who feels powerless after a painful experience might adopt the mask of the victim. A person who fears judgment might wear the mask of the perfectionist, hiding flaws behind a polished facade. These masks serve a purpose. They help us cope, fit in, and feel safe. But over time, we forget that the mask isn't our true face. The mask becomes our identity. The roles we play become who we think we are. The fear of removing the mask keeps us stuck, afraid to reveal what lies beneath. The true self versus the egoic self. The true self is the essence of who you are, unconditioned, whole, and free. It doesn't need validation from others to feel worthy. It isn't tied to roles, labels, or accomplishments. It's the quiet presence that exists beneath your thoughts, emotions, and stories. The egoic self, on the other hand, is the collection of masks and identities created to protect the true self. It's reactive, always seeking approval or avoiding rejection. It ties self-worth to external factors like success, appearance, or relationships. It fears vulnerability because it equates openness with danger. The problem arises when we mistake the egoic self for the true self. We become so attached to the masks that we lose sight of the person underneath. We confuse the roles we play with who we really are. But the masks, while protective, also limit us. They keep us from living authentically and connecting deeply with others. The masks we wear are as unique as our experiences, but certain patterns are universal. Recognizing these masks is the first step to removing them. Number 1. The achiever. I am what I accomplish. The achiever's mask is tied to the belief that self-worth comes from success. Achievers strive for recognition, promotions, and accolades. They push themselves relentlessly, fearing that failure will expose their unworthiness. Their value is tied to external validation, winning, producing, or being seen as the best. The cost: burnout, exhaustion, and a constant feeling of not enough. Relationships may suffer as achievements take priority over connection. The true self remains hidden, overshadowed by the constant need to perform. Number 2. The victim. The world is against me. The victim's mask is rooted in pain and powerlessness. Victims define themselves by their struggles, seeing life as something that happens to them. They seek sympathy or attention, often as a way to feel seen or validated. This mask can be a way to avoid responsibility, as taking control feels overwhelming. The cost: a lack of agency and empowerment. A cycle of self-pity and stagnation. Difficulty forming deep connections, as relationships may center around pity rather than mutual growth. Number 3. The perfectionist. I must be flawless to be loved. The perfectionist's mask is driven by fear of judgment and rejection. Perfectionists hide their flaws behind an image of success, beauty, or control. They avoid vulnerability because they believe mistakes or imperfections make them unworthy. Their lives become a constant quest for an unattainable standard. The cost: anxiety, self-doubt, and the inability to relax or feel content. A fear of being truly seen, as vulnerability feels like weakness. Relationships may feel surface level, as the need to appear perfect creates distance. Number 4. The rebel. I am different, and I don't need anyone. The rebel's mask is often a response to feelings of rejection or inadequacy. Rebels reject societal norms, authority, or expectations, often as a way to feel empowered. They pride themselves on their independence and uniqueness. Underneath the defiance, there's often a fear of vulnerability or being controlled. The cost: isolation, as rebellion can push others away. Difficulty accepting help or forming deep connections. The true self remains hidden behind a facade of strength and independence. Recognizing the masks is the first step. The second is the courage to take them off. Start by asking, what am I hiding behind this mask? Notice when you're acting from fear of judgment, rejection, or inadequacy. Practice small moments of vulnerability, sharing a fear, admitting a mistake, or asking for help. Removing the mask doesn't mean abandoning the roles you play. It means approaching them from a place of authenticity. You can still achieve, but not to prove your worth. You can acknowledge your struggles without being defined by them. You can embrace your uniqueness without needing to rebel against everything. Who are you beneath the mask? Ask yourself, what masks do I wear and why? What am I protecting by wearing these masks? What would it feel like to let the mask slip, even for a moment? The masks we wear are born from fear, but the courage to remove them comes from love. Love for yourself, just as you are, without pretense or performance. When we let go of the masks, something remarkable happens. We connect more deeply with others, as authenticity invites authenticity. We feel lighter, no longer burdened by the need to perform or pretend. We discover that our true self, flawed, vulnerable, and human, is enough. The ego creates masks to protect us, but life begins when we take them off. The masks we wear may feel safe, but they keep us from the freedom of being fully ourselves. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the ego weaves stories, narratives that reinforce its illusions and keep us playing its game. Let's continue. Chapter 4. The stories we tell ourselves. The ego is a storyteller, and its stories are powerful. They shape how we see ourselves, how we interact with the world, and what we believe is possible. But here's the secret: the stories aren't real. They're illusions, spun by the ego to define and defend itself. And when we stop believing them, we open the door to freedom. The ego as a storyteller. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, the ego is spinning narratives in our minds. This always happens to me. I can't do that. It's not who I am. I'll be happy when I achieve this. The ego's stories aren't random, they're deliberate. Each one is designed to reinforce the ego's sense of identity, control, and separation. The problem is that these stories often go unnoticed. They feel like truths because they've been repeated so many times. They become the lens through which we view ourselves and the world. And they limit us, keeping us trapped in patterns of thought and behavior. Recognizing the stories. The first step to seeing through the ego's illusions is recognizing the stories it tells. Story 1. I am not enough. This is one of the ego's most pervasive narratives. It whispers, I need to prove myself to be worthy. If I'm not successful, loved, or admired, I don't matter. I can't let others see my flaws, they'll reject me. This story keeps us striving, comparing, and hiding. It makes us feel as though we're incomplete and need something external, validation, achievement, perfection, to be whole. Story 2. I must win. The ego thrives on competition and comparison. It tells us, if I'm not the best, I'm failing. I need to get ahead to feel valuable. Life is a game, and winning is everything. This story creates a sense of scarcity. If someone else succeeds, it feels like there's less success available for us. It keeps us locked in a constant cycle of striving and anxiety. Story 3. I am my past. The ego loves to tie our identity to our history. It says, this is who I am because of what I've experienced. I can't change because my past defines me. People will always see me as the person I used to be. This story keeps us stuck, replaying old wounds and limiting our growth. It makes us believe that we are the sum of our mistakes, traumas, or accomplishments. The ego is deeply invested in its narratives because they create its sense of self. When someone challenges our story, the ego reacts with defensiveness or anger. When life presents evidence that contradicts the story, the ego dismisses or distorts it. The ego even uses suffering to reinforce its identity. See? I told you the world is unfair. The more we believe these stories, the more they shape our reality. To see through the ego's illusions, we must break the habit of believing its narratives. This doesn't mean silencing the ego. It means observing it with curiosity and detachment. Step 1. Notice the stories. Begin by paying attention to the thoughts running through your mind. What is the ego saying about who you are? What judgments, fears, or assumptions are woven into its narratives? What patterns repeat in different situations? For example, if I don't succeed, I'm a failure. They didn't respond to my text. Maybe they don't like me. Simply noticing the stories is a powerful first step. Step 2. Question the stories. Once you've identified a story, ask yourself, is this true? Where did this belief come from? Who would I be without this story? For example, if the ego says, I'm not good enough, you might ask, what does good enough even mean? Who told me this, and why did I believe them? What evidence do I have that contradicts this story? Often, you'll find that the story falls apart under scrutiny. Step 3. Replace judgment with curiosity. Instead of judging yourself for believing the story, approach it with curiosity. Ask, what is the ego trying to protect me from with this story? Recognize that the ego isn't your enemy. It's just a part of you trying to navigate the world. For example, if the ego says, I must win to matter, it might be trying to protect you from feelings of inadequacy. Understanding this can help you respond with compassion rather than resistance. Step 4. Create space between you and the story. The ego's stories feel powerful because we identify with them. But the truth is, you are not the story. You are not the thought, I'm not enough. You are the awareness observing the thought. You are not the emotion of fear or sadness. You are the presence holding space for those feelings. Meditation, mindfulness, and journaling are powerful tools for creating this space. When you stop believing the ego's stories, a profound shift happens. You realize you don't have to prove, defend, or justify yourself. You begin to see yourself and others with greater compassion and clarity. You discover a freedom that comes from being fully present, untethered from past narratives or future anxieties. The ego will still tell its stories, it's what it does. But you don't have to live by them. What stories are shaping your life? Ask yourself, what are the recurring stories my ego tells about who I am? How do these stories limit me or shape my relationships? What would life feel like if I didn't believe these stories? The ego's stories aren't reality, they're just one perspective. And when you see them for what they are, you begin to write a new story, one rooted in truth, freedom, and the boundless possibilities of who you really are. The ego weaves its narratives to define and defend itself, but you are not the storyteller. You are the awareness behind the words. In the next chapter, we'll explore the ego's greatest fear, dissolution, and how facing it is the key to true freedom. Let's continue. Chapter 5. The Ego's Greatest Fear. The ego clings tightly to its identity because it believes letting go means disappearing. It fears dissolution more than anything else, and this fear drives much of the anxiety, conflict, and resistance we experience in life. But what if dissolving the ego isn't the end of you? What if it's the beginning of something greater? Why the ego fears dissolution. The ego thrives on separation and definition. Its entire identity is built on the belief that I am this and I am not that. If the ego is a story, then dissolution feels like the story ending. If the ego is a mask, then taking it off feels like being exposed. If the ego is a fortress, then letting go feels like vulnerability to attack. For the ego, dissolution isn't just change, it's annihilation. This fear is rooted in the ego's misunderstanding of reality. The ego believes, I am the sum of my labels, achievements, and roles. If I lose these things, I lose myself. But the truth is, the ego is not you. When the ego dissolves, what remains is your true self, the awareness, presence, and essence that exist beyond labels and definitions. How fear of losing the me creates anxiety. The ego's fear of dissolution manifests as anxiety, conflict, and resistance. Anxiety, the fear of change. The ego craves stability because change threatens its carefully constructed identity. If you're no longer the successful one, who are you? If your relationship ends, what happens to your role as a partner? If you let go of your ambitions, what gives your life meaning? The ego interprets these shifts as existential threats, even when they're opportunities for growth. Conflict, the need to defend. When the ego feels threatened, it reacts defensively. A differing opinion becomes a personal attack. A challenge to your beliefs feels like a challenge to your existence. Criticism of your work becomes a criticism of your worth. This defensiveness creates conflict, both internally and externally. The ego fights to maintain its sense of self, even at the cost of peace. Resistance, the fear of letting go. The ego resists anything that threatens its grip, uncertainty, vulnerability, and surrender. It resists meditation because stillness feels like emptiness. It resists forgiveness because it thrives on holding grudges. It resists love because love requires letting down walls. This resistance keeps us stuck in patterns of fear, doubt, and separation. Learning to sit with discomfort. The ego's fear of dissolution often feels overwhelming. But the key to freedom isn't avoiding this fear, it's learning to sit with it. Step 1. Recognize the fear. The first step is noticing when the ego's fear is driving your thoughts and actions. Are you reacting defensively to protect your identity? Are you feeling anxious about losing control? Are you resisting change, even when it could bring growth? By recognizing the fear, you create space between yourself and the ego's reaction. Step 2. Sit with the discomfort. The ego fears dissolution because it misunderstands what's on the other side. When you sit with discomfort, you realize it won't destroy you. When you let go of control, you discover a deeper sense of trust. When you stop defending your identity, you find freedom in being undefended. Sitting with discomfort is an act of courage. It's choosing to face the ego's fear rather than running from it. Step 3. Witness the fear without identifying with it. The ego says, "I am afraid," but the truth is, fear is happening. You are not the fear, you are the awareness observing it. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," say, "Anxiety is present." Instead of saying, "I am afraid of losing myself," say, "Fear of loss is arising." This shift in perspective creates distance between you and the ego's fear, allowing you to witness it without being consumed by it. When you stop identifying with the ego's fear, something remarkable happens. You stop clinging to labels, roles, and achievements. You stop reacting defensively to challenges and criticism. You stop resisting the flow of life and start moving with it. The ego wants you to believe that letting go will leave you empty. But letting go is what makes space for peace, joy, and connection. Dissolution isn't the death of the self, it's the death of illusion. When the ego dissolves, what remains is the true self, vast, whole, and unshakable. You no longer need to prove or defend yourself because you realize you were always enough. You experience life not as a competition or struggle, but as a flow of moments to be embraced. The ego's greatest fear, dissolution, is also your greatest freedom. What are you afraid to lose? Ask yourself, what parts of my identity feel essential, and why? What am I clinging to out of fear of letting go? What might I discover if I stepped beyond the ego's grip? Sitting with the ego's fear is uncomfortable, but it's also transformative. It's the doorway to a life that isn't bound by anxiety, conflict, or resistance. The ego fears dissolution because it doesn't understand what lies beyond it. But you don't have to fear what the ego fears. In the next chapter, we'll explore how awareness, the power of simply observing, can disrupt the ego's patterns and lead to profound freedom. Let's continue. Chapter 6. The Power of Awareness. The ego thrives in darkness, operating unnoticed in the background of our thoughts and actions. But awareness is like a light. It reveals the ego's patterns for what they are, illusions. Awareness doesn't fight the ego, it simply sees it. And in seeing it, we begin to realize a profound truth. We are not the ego. We are the awareness watching it all unfold. How awareness disrupts the ego's patterns. The ego operates on autopilot. It reacts to challenges with defensiveness. It interprets situations through the lens of its own narratives. It clings to roles, labels, and expectations to maintain its sense of identity. These patterns remain powerful because they're often invisible. We don't realize we're caught in them, so they control us. But awareness changes everything. When you notice a defensive reaction, it loses its grip. When you observe a recurring thought, it begins to unravel. When you bring awareness to the ego's stories, they stop feeling like absolute truths. Awareness doesn't need to fight the ego, it simply sees through it. The ego is a pattern, not a problem. The ego isn't an enemy to be defeated, it's a set of conditioned patterns. A child who was criticized might develop the egoic pattern of perfectionism. A person who experienced rejection might adopt the egoic pattern of seeking validation. A high achiever might create an identity around success to avoid feelings of inadequacy. These patterns are deeply ingrained, but they're not permanent. When you bring awareness to them, you see that they're not who you are, they're just habits of thought and behavior. Practicing mindfulness to observe the ego. Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention to the present moment with curiosity and non-judgment. It's the foundation of awareness, and it's how we begin to observe the ego without identifying with it. Step 1. Notice your thoughts. Sit quietly and observe the flow of your thoughts. What themes or patterns emerge? Are there recurring judgments, fears, or assumptions? Do certain thoughts trigger emotional reactions? For example, you might notice thoughts like, "I can't do this," or "they don't like me." Instead of believing these thoughts, simply notice them. Step 2. Name the ego's reactions. When you catch yourself reacting, name the ego's pattern. If you feel defensive, think, "The ego is defending itself." If you feel superior or inferior, think, "The ego is comparing." If you feel anxious, think, "The ego is fearing loss." Naming the ego's reactions creates distance between you and the reaction. Step 3. Watch without judgment. The ego thrives on judgment, of yourself, of others, of circumstances. But awareness is neutral. It doesn't label things as good or bad. It simply observes. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm being so defensive again," I should stop, think, "Defensiveness is happening." That's interesting. This shift from judgment to curiosity breaks the ego's cycle of self-criticism. Step 4. Bring awareness to the present moment. The ego lives in the past and the future. It replays old wounds and worries about what's to come. Mindfulness anchors you in the present, where the ego's stories lose their power. Focus on your breath, the sensations in your body, or the sounds around you. Notice the stillness that exists beneath the noise of thought. In this stillness, the ego's grip begins to loosen. The ego wants you to believe it is you, that its thoughts, stories, and reactions define who you are. But awareness reveals the truth. You are not the thought, "I'm not good enough." You are the awareness observing the thought. You are not the anger, fear, or anxiety. You are the presence holding space for those emotions. This realization is both simple and profound. You are not the ego. You are the awareness behind it. When you identify with the ego, its patterns feel automatic and unavoidable. But awareness creates space to pause, reflect, and choose a different response. For example, if someone criticizes you, the ego might react defensively. But with awareness, you can pause and think, "That's the ego defending itself. I don't have to react." If you feel inadequate, the ego might spiral into self-doubt. But with awareness, you can think, "This is a story the ego is telling. It's not the truth." This space is where freedom begins. The more you practice mindfulness, the more you realize that awareness is your true nature. Awareness isn't reactive, it's calm, steady, and open. Awareness isn't limited by identity. It sees beyond labels and roles. Awareness isn't separate, it connects you to others, to the world, and to the present moment. Living as awareness doesn't mean the ego disappears. It means the ego stops running the show. Who are you without the ego? Ask yourself, what patterns of thought or behavior does my ego repeat? What happens when I observe these patterns without judgment? Who am I when I stop identifying with the ego's stories and reactions? The ego isn't the enemy, it's a habit. And awareness is the key to breaking that habit, not through force, but through understanding. The ego thrives in the shadows, but awareness brings it into the light. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the ego sets traps to keep us stuck in its game, and how we can recognize and escape them. Let's continue. Chapter 7. The Ego's Traps. The ego doesn't want to let go. It wants to keep you playing its game. To do this, it sets traps that feel comforting, even logical, but ultimately keep you stuck. These traps, validation, control, and permanence, promise security but deliver suffering. Freedom begins when you recognize these traps for what they are and choose to step around them. The trap of validation, seeking approval to feel worthy / The ego craves validation like a fire craves oxygen. It needs external approval to feel worthy, important, and real. A compliment feels like a win. A criticism feels like a threat. Indifference feels like invisibility, a fate the ego fears most of all. The trap lies in believing that your value depends on others' opinions. How the validation trap works. The ego tells you that if they like me, I'm worthy. It convinces you to shape your behavior, appearance, or opinions to gain approval. The ego fears rejection because it equates disapproval with worthlessness. This trap keeps you chasing external validation, even at the cost of authenticity. The cost of seeking validation. You suppress your true self to fit others' expectations. You base your happiness on factors you can't control. You feel empty even after gaining approval because the ego always wants more. Escaping the validation trap. True freedom comes from recognizing that your worth isn't up for debate. Practice self-validation. Celebrate your own efforts and achievements, regardless of others' opinions. Let go of people-pleasing. Recognize when you're acting to gain approval and ask, what do I truly want? Shift your focus. Instead of asking, do they like me? Ask, am I being authentic? When you stop seeking validation, you reclaim your power and begin to live from a place of inner truth. The trap of control. Believing you can control everything. The ego thrives on the illusion of control. It tells you, if I can control this situation, I'll be safe. If I can predict the future, I'll avoid failure. If I can control others, I'll get what I want. The trap lies in believing that control equals security. How the control trap works. The ego fears uncertainty and tries to eliminate it through planning, micromanaging, or manipulation. It resists change because change feels like chaos, a threat to its carefully constructed identity. It clings to rigid expectations, creating frustration when reality doesn't align. The cost of control. You expend endless energy trying to manage things beyond your power. You experience anxiety when the unexpected happens, and it always does. You miss the beauty of spontaneity and flow because you're focused on controlling outcomes. Escaping the control trap. Freedom comes from embracing uncertainty and trusting the flow of life. Release what you can't control. Make a list of what's within your power and what isn't. Let go of the latter. Focus on the present. Instead of obsessing over future outcomes, ask, what can I do right now? Trust the process. Recognize that life often unfolds in ways you can't predict, but are ultimately for your growth. When you stop clinging to control, you discover a sense of peace that comes from aligning with, rather than resisting, life's flow. The ego longs for permanence because it fears the impermanence of life. It wants relationships to last forever, success to be unchanging, identities to remain fixed. The trap lies in believing that stability is possible in a world defined by change. How the permanence trap works. The ego clings to attachments, people, roles, possessions, as if they define your worth. It resists endings, viewing them as losses rather than transitions. It fears change because change feels like the dissolution of the self. The cost of clinging to permanence. You suffer when things inevitably change or end. You resist growth because it requires letting go of the old to embrace the new. You live in a constant state of tension, trying to hold on to what cannot be held. Escaping the permanence trap. Freedom comes from embracing impermanence as a natural part of life. Practice gratitude. Appreciate the present moment without clinging to it. Reframe endings. See them not as losses, but as opportunities for transformation. Adopt a growth mindset. Recognize that change is essential for evolution and renewal. When you let go of the need for permanence, you experience life as it truly is, fluid, dynamic, and full of possibility. The traps of validation, control, and permanence feel comforting because they promise security. But this security is an illusion. Validation doesn't make you worthy. You are always worthy. Control doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It creates stress. Permanence doesn't exist. It's a story the ego tells to avoid facing impermanence. The moment you see these traps for what they are, their grip begins to loosen. Which trap holds you the tightest? Ask yourself, do I seek validation from others, and at what cost? Am I clinging to control, even in situations beyond my power? What am I holding on to out of fear of impermanence? Freedom isn't about eliminating the ego. It's about recognizing its patterns and choosing not to be ruled by them. The ego sets traps to keep you playing its game, but awareness allows you to step around them. In the next chapter, we'll explore how letting go of the ego's identity, its sense of me, can lead to a profound sense of freedom and connection. Let's continue. Chapter 8. Letting Go of Me. The ego holds tightly to its identity, defining itself through roles, achievements, and stories. It says, "This is who I am," as though these labels are the essence of you. But what happens when you let go of the need to define yourself? What happens when the boundaries of me dissolve and you move into something greater? What you lose is illusion. What you gain is freedom. What it means to let go of the ego's identity. The ego is built on identity. I am my accomplishments. I am my failures. I am my past, my role, my relationships. These identities feel solid, but they're not. They're stories, constructs that give the ego a sense of self, but often limit who you truly are. Letting go of the ego's identity doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means loosening your grip on the stories and roles you've been taught to believe define you. The ego's identity is conditional. The ego's sense of me is conditional. It depends on external factors. If you're praised, you feel worthy. If you're criticized, you feel small. If you succeed, you feel confident. If you fail, you feel unworthy. If your role changes, a parent whose children grow up, an athlete who retires, a professional who loses their job, the ego panics, asking, "Who am I without this?" The ego's identity is like a house built on sand. It shifts with every wave of external validation or rejection, leaving you feeling unstable and incomplete. But your true self isn't conditional. It doesn't depend on achievements, roles, or opinions. It simply is. The fear of losing the ego's identity. The ego fears letting go of its identity because it equates that loss with non-existence. It says, "If I'm not this, then I am nothing." It clings to roles, labels, and stories because they make it feel real. But letting go of the ego's identity doesn't mean you cease to exist. It means you stop mistaking the story for the storyteller. You realize that who you are is deeper, vaster, and freer than any label could ever contain. Moving from I am to I am part of, the ego says, I am separate. Separate from others. Separate from nature. Separate from the flow of life. But this separateness is an illusion. When you let go of the ego's identity, you begin to see yourself not as a separate me, but as part of something much larger. The shift from separation to connection. Instead of saying, I am my achievements, you say, I am part of the collective creativity of life. Instead of saying, I am my relationships, you say, I am part of a vast web of connection and love. Instead of saying, I am my body, you say, I am part of the energy that animates all living things. This shift isn't about losing yourself. It's about expanding your sense of self to include everything. You're no longer a drop in the ocean. You're the ocean in a drop. You're no longer separate from life. You're an expression of life itself. The humility and freedom of I am part of. When you move from I am to I am part of, two profound changes occur. You find humility. You realize you're not the center of the universe. But that's freeing. You no longer need to prove your worth or defend your identity. You find freedom. You're no longer bound by the ego's need for validation, control, or permanence. You can embrace life as it is, without clinging to roles or labels. The surprising freedom of not being bound by the ego's illusions. The ego's game is exhausting. It's a constant cycle of striving, comparing, and defending. But when you let go of the ego's identity, you step into a state of profound freedom. What you lose: the need to prove yourself, the fear of rejection or failure, the illusion of separateness. What you gain: a deep sense of peace, unshaken by external circumstances, the ability to connect authentically with others without egoic masks, the freedom to live fully in the present moment, untethered by past stories or future anxieties, the joy of being unbound. When you're no longer bound by the ego's illusions, life becomes lighter. You laugh more because you're not worried about looking foolish. You love more because you're not afraid of vulnerability. You create more because you're not tied to outcomes. This is the paradox of letting go. You don't lose yourself, you find your true self. What would it feel like to let go of me? Ask yourself, what roles, labels, or stories am I clinging to? Who am I beyond these identities? What might I discover if I stopped trying to define myself and simply allowed myself to be? Letting go of me isn't a loss, it's a return to your true nature, which is vast, whole, and inseparable from life itself. The ego's identity is like a cage, but the door is always open. In the next chapter, we'll explore the joy of being, the state of freedom, presence, and connection that emerges when we stop playing the ego's game. Let's continue. Chapter 9. The Joy of Being. What happens when we stop playing the ego's games? When we step off the treadmill of striving, comparison, and fear, what we find is not emptiness, but fullness. Not stagnation, but freedom. Life beyond the ego's games isn't dull or detached. It's vibrant, peaceful, and deeply joyful. This is the joy of simply being. Discovering life beyond the ego's games. The ego's games, seeking validation, clinging to control, and chasing permanence, keep us in a state of tension and dissatisfaction. When we win, the victory feels fleeting. When we lose, the pain feels overwhelming. And when the game pauses, the ego demands we prepare for the next round. But life beyond the ego's games feels entirely different. There's no need to win because there's no one to compete against. There's no fear of losing because there's nothing to defend. There's no urgency to prepare for the future because the present is enough. This is life without the ego's agenda, a life of ease, flow, and joy. What does it mean to simply be? Being is not about doing nothing. It's about engaging with life authentically, without pretense or expectation. You listen to a loved one, not to impress or influence them, but simply to connect. You create, not to achieve fame or success, but because the act of creating brings you alive. You move through the world, not as someone trying to prove their worth, but as someone already whole. When you step into being, life stops feeling like a race and starts feeling like an unfolding, a series of moments to be experienced fully and freely. How presence replaces striving, comparison, and fear. Presence over striving. The ego thrives on striving. It always wants more. More success. More approval. More control. But presence reveals that you don't need more to feel complete. In this moment, you already have everything you need. When you're fully present, even the simplest experiences, a breath, a sunrise, a shared smile, feel profound. Presence isn't about giving up on goals. It's about pursuing them from a place of peace rather than lack. You still work toward dreams, but you're not defined by the outcome. You still take action, but you're not driven by the fear of failure or the need to prove yourself. Connection over comparison. The ego constantly compares, measuring your worth against others. Am I smarter, richer, more successful? Am I falling behind or getting ahead? But presence dissolves comparison. When you're fully present, you're not thinking about who you're better or worse than. You're simply connecting with yourself, with others, with the moment. In this state, relationships become richer because they're no longer transactional. You're not trying to get something from others or prove something to them. You're simply sharing the experience of being alive. Courage over fear. The ego fears change, failure, and vulnerability because it clings to a fixed sense of self. But presence allows you to embrace life's uncertainties. You're no longer afraid of failure because failure doesn't define you. You're no longer resistant to change because you see it as part of life's flow. You're no longer avoiding vulnerability because you understand that being open is the key to true connection. Fear doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its grip. You learn to move through fear with curiosity and courage. The peace that comes from living authentically. Authenticity is the natural result of stepping out of the ego's games. Without the need to impress, you can speak your truth. Without the fear of judgment, you can show your flaws. Without the pressure to achieve, you can follow your heart. Living authentically isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about showing up as you are, without pretense or performance. The lightness of authentic living. When you live authentically, life feels lighter. You laugh more because you're not trying to appear a certain way. You cry more because you're not afraid of being seen as weak. You rest more because you're not driven by the need to constantly achieve. This lightness isn't laziness, it's freedom. Freedom to be yourself, fully and unapologetically. The joy of being isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, steady, and profound. It's the joy of watching the sunset without needing to capture it on your phone. It's the joy of listening to a friend without thinking about what you'll say next. It's the joy of feeling your breath move in and out, realizing that this moment is enough. This joy isn't something you earn. It's something you uncover when you let go of the ego's distractions. What does joy look like for you? Ask yourself, when do I feel most at peace? What brings me joy when I'm not striving or comparing? How can I bring more presence into my daily life? The joy of being isn't about adding something to your life. It's about noticing what's already here. The ego's games promise happiness, but they can never deliver it. True joy comes from stepping out of the game and stepping into presence. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore how to live beyond the ego, not as a practice, but as a way of being. Let's continue. Chapter 10. Relationships without ego. The ego craves connection but fears vulnerability. It wants to be loved but is afraid to love unconditionally. It sees relationships as a way to validate its existence rather than as an opportunity to share, grow, and connect. When we let go of the ego's grip on our relationships, we move from transactional interactions to a space of deep, unconditional presence. And this is where true intimacy begins. How the ego distorts love, friendship, and connection. The ego sees relationships not as shared experiences, but as opportunities to reinforce its identity. It seeks validation. If they love me, I must be worthy. It avoids vulnerability. If I show my flaws, they might reject me. It keeps score. I did this for them. What have they done for me? In the ego's world, relationships often become transactional. Love is conditional. I'll love you if you meet my expectations. Friendships are based on utility. What can you do for me? Connection is superficial. I'll let you see only the parts of me I think you'll approve of. The result is shallow, fragile relationships that crumble under the weight of unmet expectations or conflicts. The illusion of control in relationships. The ego tries to control relationships to maintain its sense of safety. It manipulates others to get what it wants. It clings to people who make it feel secure. It pushes away those who challenge its identity. This need for control creates tension, resentment, and disconnection. True connection requires surrender, something the ego resists because it fears losing its grip. Moving from transactional relationships to unconditional presence. Transactional relationships, a scorecard of give and take. In transactional relationships, the ego constantly evaluates. Am I getting enough out of this? Am I giving too much? Do they appreciate me enough? This mindset turns relationships into a balancing act, where love and care are given only in exchange for something in return. But love, at its deepest, isn't a transaction. It's a gift, a flow that doesn't measure or calculate. Unconditional presence, the gift of being fully here. Unconditional presence means showing up in relationships without expectations or demands. You listen, not to respond or fix, but simply to hear. You give, not to receive, but because giving feels natural. You love, not to be loved back, but because love is who you are. When you move into unconditional presence, relationships transform. Conflicts soften because you're no longer defending your ego. Intimacy deepens because vulnerability becomes safe. Connection flourishes because you're no longer hiding behind masks. How letting go of ego heals conflicts. Conflicts often arise because the ego feels threatened. It says, they don't respect me. It thinks, I need to win this argument to feel validated. It clings to being right, even at the expense of harmony. But when you let go of the ego, conflict becomes an opportunity for connection. Instead of defending your position, you seek to understand theirs. Instead of reacting with anger, you respond with curiosity. Instead of trying to win, you focus on finding common ground. Letting go of the ego doesn't mean you lose your voice or suppress your needs. It means you communicate from a place of authenticity rather than defensiveness. The ego's need to be right. The ego equates being wrong with being unworthy. It fears admitting mistakes because it sees them as flaws in its identity. It argues not to solve problems, but to protect its sense of self. But when you release the ego's need to be right, something remarkable happens. You become open to learning and growth. You prioritize understanding over winning. You discover that humility strengthens relationships rather than weakening them. Deepening intimacy without ego. Intimacy requires vulnerability, a willingness to be seen fully, flaws and all. The ego fears this because it thrives on control and perfection. It says, if they see the real me, they might reject me. If I admit I need them, I'll seem weak. But vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the courage to show up authentically and invite others to do the same. Practices for ego-free intimacy. Listen fully. Put aside your need to respond or fix. Be present with their words, emotions, and silences. Own your vulnerability. Share your fears, hopes, and insecurities without shame. Let them see the real you, not the curated version. Let go of expectations. Love them as they are, not as you wish they were. Release the need for them to meet all your needs. Apologize and forgive. Take responsibility for your mistakes without defensiveness. Offer forgiveness freely, not as a favor, but as a gift to yourself and them. How is the ego shaping your relationships? Ask yourself, am I seeking validation or offering unconditional presence? Do I prioritize being right over being connected? What would my relationships look like if I let go of the ego's need for control and pretense? When you let go of the ego in your relationships, you discover a new way of connecting. You love more freely because you're not protecting yourself. You listen more deeply because you're not distracted by your own agenda. You forgive more easily because you're not clinging to resentment as part of your identity. Relationships without ego aren't perfect, but they're real. And that realness brings a depth of intimacy and connection that the ego's games could never provide. The ego distorts relationships by making them about itself, but true connection begins when we let the ego step aside. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the ego shapes our relationship with success, and how to redefine ambition in a way that aligns with authenticity and joy. Let's continue. Chapter 11. The Ego and Success. Success is one of the ego's favorite games. It promises fulfillment through achievement, validation, and status, yet it leaves us chasing an ever-moving goalpost. But what if success isn't about getting ahead? What if it's about growing whole, about pursuing goals authentically and letting go of the attachment to outcomes? Rethinking achievement. Success without attachment. The ego equates success with worth. If you achieve your goals, you're good enough. If you fail, you're not. This conditional sense of self-worth keeps you tethered to outcomes. You push yourself to meet societal expectations, even if they don't align with your values. You fear failure, not because of the effort lost, but because it feels like a personal defeat. You achieve something, only to feel the hollowness of needing to achieve more. The trap lies in attachment, believing that success defines who you are. Success without attachment. Success without attachment means pursuing your goals with passion and effort, but without letting the outcome define your worth. You work toward a promotion, but your happiness isn't dependent on getting it. You start a creative project, but you're not crushed if it doesn't gain recognition. You dream big, but you don't let setbacks diminish your sense of self. When you detach from outcomes, you experience success as a journey, not a destination. Letting go of the ego's metrics. The ego measures success in external terms: wealth, status, approval. But true success often looks very different. The courage to pursue a dream, even if it's unconventional. The joy of learning and growing, regardless of recognition. The peace of living in alignment with your values. Letting go of the ego's metrics allows you to define success on your own terms. How to pursue goals authentically without falling into ego traps. The ego's traps turn goals into burdens. They create pressure to succeed, fear of failure, and an obsession with comparison. But you can pursue goals authentically by shifting your focus from outcome to intention. 1. Set intentions, not just goals. The ego is fixated on results. I must achieve this. Authenticity focuses on intentions. Why am I pursuing this goal? Instead of chasing a promotion for status, you might aim to grow your skills and contribute meaningfully. Instead of striving for fame, you might focus on creating work that feels true to you. When your intentions align with your values, the pursuit itself becomes fulfilling. 2. Embrace the process. The ego wants instant results. Authenticity values the process, the effort, learning, and growth that come from pursuing a goal. Celebrate small milestones rather than waiting for the final achievement. See challenges as opportunities to grow, not obstacles to your worth. Focus on what you're gaining internally, not just externally. The process is where life happens. The outcome is simply a bonus. 3. Detach from comparison. The ego constantly compares your success to others. Am I ahead? Why are they doing better than me? Authenticity recognizes that success isn't a race, it's a personal journey. Remind yourself, their success doesn't diminish mine. Focus on your unique path rather than measuring yourself against others. Practice gratitude for what you have rather than longing for what others possess. Comparison limits your joy. Authenticity sets it free. 4. Redefine failure. The ego fears failure because it sees it as a threat to identity. Authenticity views failure as feedback, a natural part of growth. Instead of thinking, I failed, so I'm not good enough, think, this didn't work out, but I learned something valuable. Allow yourself to take risks, knowing that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the journey toward it. Freedom comes from realizing that failure doesn't define you. Redefining ambition, from getting ahead to growing whole. The ego sees ambition as a ladder. Each rung climbed is a step closer to enough. But this kind of ambition often leads to burnout, emptiness, and disconnection. True ambition isn't about getting ahead, it's about growing whole. Ambition is self-discovery. Authentic ambition is about discovering and expressing your true self. It's not about proving your worth, it's about living in alignment with your values. It's not about accumulating external success, it's about cultivating internal fulfillment. It's not about reaching a destination, it's about becoming who you're meant to be. When ambition becomes an act of self-discovery, it feels expansive rather than exhausting. Ambition as contribution. The ego's ambition is self-centered. What can I get? Authentic ambition asks, what can I give? How can your work contribute to the well-being of others? How can your goals serve a greater purpose? How can your success uplift those around you? Ambition rooted in contribution creates a sense of connection and meaning that the ego's pursuits can never provide. Ambition as presence. The ego is always looking ahead. What's next? Authenticity brings ambition into the present moment. You pursue your goals with mindfulness, fully engaged in each step. You find joy in the journey, not just the destination. You recognize that success isn't about the future. It's about how you show up right now. How do you define success? Ask yourself, are my goals aligned with my values, or are they shaped by external expectations? Am I pursuing success to prove my worth, or to express my true self? What would success feel like if I let go of comparison and attachment? Redefining success isn't about abandoning ambition. It's about pursuing it in a way that feels authentic, joyful, and free. The ego turns success into a race, but true success isn't about getting ahead, it's about growing whole. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to transcend not just personal ambition, but the collective ego that shapes our societies and cultures. Let's continue. Chapter 12, the collective ego. The ego isn't just a personal construct. It operates on a larger scale, shaping groups, societies, and cultures. When the ego's need for separation, validation, and control becomes collective, it creates powerful illusions that divide us and perpetuate suffering. But recognizing these collective illusions offers a profound opportunity to build a world rooted in connection, compassion, and shared humanity. How the ego operates in groups, societies, and cultures. The collective ego mirrors the personal ego. It thrives on identity. Groups define themselves as us and contrast themselves with them. Comparison. Societies measure their worth against others through wealth, power, or progress. Control. Cultures create rules and norms to maintain their collective sense of order and superiority. When individuals align their personal ego with the collective ego, the result is a powerful sense of belonging, but one that often excludes, competes with, or devalues those outside the group. The collective ego's need for superiority. The collective ego operates on the belief that one group's identity is more valid or superior than another's. This creates division and conflict. Our nation is the best. Our way of life is the only correct way. Our group is morally superior. These beliefs foster tribalism and perpetuate cycles of competition, mistrust, and violence. The collective ego's fear of change. Just as the individual ego clings to its identity, the collective ego resists anything that threatens its established narratives. Historical myths are upheld to maintain national pride. Social norms are enforced to protect traditional power structures. Economic systems are preserved, even when they cause harm, to avoid destabilization. This resistance to change prevents progress and stifles innovation. To see through the collective ego, we must recognize the illusions it creates. 1. Nationalism. Nationalism often elevates one nation's identity above all others, fostering division and exclusion. It tells a story of superiority. Our history, culture, and values are better. It justifies conflict and oppression in the name of patriotism. It creates a false sense of security by isolating nations from global connection. Seeing through the illusion. Nations are not independent entities. They are interdependent. Borders are human constructs. Our shared humanity transcends them. True strength comes from collaboration, not domination. 2. Tribalism. Tribalism divides us into smaller groups based on religion, politics, ethnicity, or ideology. It creates an us versus them mentality, fueling competition and hostility. It values loyalty to the group over critical thinking or compassion. It resists diversity, fearing that difference threatens unity. Seeing through the illusion. Unity doesn't require uniformity. Diversity strengthens us. Differences are not threats. They are opportunities for growth and understanding. Our shared humanity outweighs any tribal identity. 3. Consumerism. Consumerism fuels the collective ego by equating worth with wealth and possessions. It tells us, you are what you own. It fosters a culture of comparison and competition, where success is measured by material abundance. It exploits resources and people in the pursuit of profit, ignoring long-term consequences. seeing through the illusion. True worth isn't found in possessions, but in experiences, relationships, and self-expression. Endless consumption doesn't lead to happiness. It leads to depletion, both personal and planetary. Sustainability and mindfulness are pathways to genuine abundance. The collective ego thrives on division and competition, but we have the power to build a world rooted in connection and collaboration. 1. Embrace shared humanity. Recognize that beneath our differences, we all share the same needs: love, safety, purpose, and belonging. Foster empathy by listening to others' stories and experiences. Actively challenge narratives that dehumanize or exclude. 2. Redefine success as collective well-being. Shift focus from individual achievements to collective progress. Prioritize policies and practices that uplift communities, reduce inequality, and protect the planet. Measure success by metrics like happiness, health, and sustainability, rather than GDP or wealth. 3. Cultivate global responsibility. Recognize that we are interconnected, not just as humans, but as part of the natural world. Support global initiatives that address shared challenges like climate change, poverty, and inequality. Act locally with a global mindset, understanding that small actions ripple outward. 4. Create space for dialogue and understanding. Encourage open conversations that challenge collective assumptions and foster mutual respect. Replace debates with dialogues, focusing on understanding rather than winning. Celebrate diverse perspectives as essential to progress. What illusions are you participating in? Ask yourself, what collective stories do I accept without questioning? How do my actions support or challenge the collective ego's patterns? What small steps can I take to build connection rather than division? Recognizing the collective ego isn't about rejecting your group or culture. It's about seeing beyond its illusions to act with greater awareness and compassion. A world without the collective ego's games isn't a utopia. It's a place where we acknowledge our shared humanity and act accordingly. It's a world where nations collaborate rather than compete. It's a world where diversity is celebrated, not feared. It's a world where success is measured not by what we have, but by what we give. Building this world begins with each of us, as individuals. When we let go of the collective ego's illusions, we create space for connection, understanding, and transformation. The collective ego divides us, but our shared humanity unites us. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to sustain a life beyond the ego, not as an occasional practice, but as a way of being. Let's continue. Conclusion: the end of the game. The ego's game is relentless, yet the moment you see it for what it is, the rules no longer apply. This journey of understanding the ego is not about defeating or erasing it. It's about understanding its nature and choosing to live beyond its illusions. When you step out of the game, life doesn't lose meaning. It becomes richer, deeper, and infinitely freer. Understanding, not erasing. The ego is not your enemy. It's a part of you, born from your mind's desire to protect and define itself. The ego helped you navigate the world, giving you a sense of self and boundaries. It created stories, roles, and masks to help you feel safe and valued. But the ego is a limited tool, not the essence of who you are. Its stories are incomplete, its rules rigid, its fears exaggerated. When you identify solely with the ego, you live in a state of striving, separation, and resistance. Seeing through the ego isn't about destroying it, it's about understanding it. When you understand the ego, you can live with it, but not be controlled by it. Living beyond the ego doesn't mean abandoning your identity. You can still enjoy your roles, relationships, and achievements. You can still express your unique personality, talents, and dreams. But you hold these things lightly, knowing they are not the entirety of who you are. You are not just a parent, partner, or professional. You are not defined by your past, your possessions, or your reputation. You are the awareness that exists beyond all these labels, the vast, timeless presence that watches the game unfold. When you hold your identity lightly, you experience life with a sense of freedom and curiosity. Success feels less pressured because it doesn't define you. Relationships feel richer because they're not weighed down by expectations. Challenges feel less threatening because they don't shake your core sense of self. The ego craves control because it fears the unknown. It wants to control how others see you. It wants to control outcomes and avoid failure. It wants to cling to permanence in a world that is constantly changing. But true freedom doesn't come from controlling the ego. You don't need to fight its thoughts or fears. You don't need to silence its stories. Freedom comes from realizing that you are not the ego. The ego's voice is like background noise. You hear it, but you don't need to believe it. The ego's games are like a dream. You can play along, but you don't have to take them seriously. When you realize you were never the ego to begin with, the need to control it dissolves. The ultimate lesson: you were never the ego. At its core, this journey is about returning to your true self. The self that exists beyond roles, labels, and stories. The self that doesn't need validation, control, or comparison. The self that is whole, connected, and free. The ego will still be there. It's part of being human. But its games no longer define you. You can listen to its fears without being consumed by them. You can notice its patterns without being trapped by them. You can let it exist, but choose to live from a deeper, truer place. Living beyond the ego isn't about escaping reality. It's about engaging with it more fully. You show up for life with presence and authenticity. You connect with others from a place of love, not fear. You pursue goals not to prove your worth, but to express your essence. This isn't a life free from challenges or imperfections. It's a life free from the need to resist them. When joy arises, you savor it. When pain arises, you accept it. When change happens, you flow with it. This is the joy of being, the freedom of living authentically, without pretense or illusion, stepping beyond the ego. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to live without the need to prove, defend, or control? What possibilities open up when I see the ego for what it is? Who am I beyond the stories, roles, and labels I've carried? The answers aren't something to figure out. They're something to experience. The journey doesn't end with understanding the ego. It begins there. The ego's game is compelling, but you don't have to play. Freedom isn't about winning or losing. It's about stepping off the board and discovering the vastness of life beyond it. The truth is, you were never the game, the player, or the pieces. You are the space in which it all unfolds. And that space is infinite, peaceful, and free. The space beyond me. Imagine a life without the ego at the center. A life where you no longer measure your worth by achievements or compare your path to anyone else's. A life where love, connection, and joy arise naturally, unburdened by the need to prove, defend, or control. This is the space beyond me, the vast, peaceful, and boundless essence of who you truly are. Life without the ego at the center. Living without the ego at the center doesn't mean the ego disappears. It means the ego becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool, not a master. You can still use your talents, pursue goals, and express your personality, but these things no longer define you. You still feel emotions like anger, fear, or pride, but they pass through you without sticking, like clouds moving across the sky. You engage fully with life, but you're no longer weighed down by the ego's endless demands. In this space beyond me, life feels lighter. You discover that. Peace is not something you chase. It's the natural state when the noise of the ego quiets. Love is not something you earn. It's the essence of who you are. Joy is not tied to circumstances. It arises from simply being present with what is. How seeing through the illusion transforms life. When you see through the ego's illusion, you step into a new way of living. 1. Relationships become deeper. The ego approaches relationships as transactions. What can I gain, prove, or protect? But without the ego at the center. You listen to others without needing to respond or fix. You love without conditions or expectations. You connect with others not as separate beings, but as reflections of the same shared essence. 2. Challenges become opportunities. The ego fears failure, criticism, and change. But when you live beyond the ego, challenges no longer threaten your identity. Failure becomes a teacher, not a judgment of your worth. Criticism becomes feedback, not a personal attack. Change becomes an adventure, not a loss. 3. Life feels full, even in its simplicity. The ego thrives on striving, always reaching for the next goal, the next achievement. But in the space beyond me, you realize, happiness isn't in the next big thing. It's in the small, ordinary moments. Fulfillment isn't in external success. It's in the simple act of being present. Meaning isn't something you create. It's something you uncover in the flow of life. The ego's game is compelling. It pulls you in with promises of success, love, and security. But the game is rigged. It can never truly fulfill you. Stepping off the board doesn't mean abandoning your life or your goals. It means approaching them from a place of freedom rather than fear. You no longer play to win or avoid losing. You play because the game itself is a beautiful, fleeting experience. You no longer cling to roles or identities. You let them come and go, knowing they are not the essence of you. You no longer resist the flow of life. You step into it, trusting it to take you where you need to be. This is the space beyond me, a life unbound by the ego's illusions. Who you really are. The ego's greatest illusion is that it is you, but who you really are is far greater. You are the awareness that watches thoughts come and go. You are the presence that feels emotions without being defined by them. You are the stillness beneath the noise, the vastness beneath the identity, the essence that remains when the stories fall away. When you discover this truth, life doesn't become perfect, it becomes real. You feel joy, not because everything is going well, but because you're no longer chasing or resisting. You love, not because someone deserves it, but because love is your natural state. You find peace, not because you've controlled the chaos, but because you've stopped identifying with it. A final reflection. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to live without the need to prove, defend, or control? What possibilities open up when I step beyond the ego's illusions? Who am I beyond the labels, roles, and stories I've carried? This isn't a question you answer with your mind. It's a truth you uncover by living. The ego's game is an illusion, but the freedom beyond it is real. Step off the board. Leave the game behind. Discover the vastness of the space beyond me. In that space, you'll find not just who you are, but the infinite possibilities of life itself. Thank you for listening to The Ego's Game, How to See Through the Illusion of Me, written and published by Mindful Literary. This journey has been about more than understanding the ego. It's been about discovering the vastness of who you truly are. As you move forward, remember that the ego's game isn't one you have to play. You are not the stories, the fears, or the labels it creates. You are the awareness beyond it, the stillness, the presence, the infinite potential that remains when the illusions fade. If this book has inspired or resonated with you, we invite you to share your support. By doing so, you help us continue creating meaningful content that uplifts, transforms, and inspires. Until next time, may your journey be one of freedom, connection, and the joy of simply being. Thank you and take care.